Merhabalar, İstanbul Bilgi Üniversitesi Medya Bölümü olarak sizi bugün misafir ediyoruz. Aramızda 3 değerli hoca var, 4 olacaktı ama kar muhalefeti nedeniyle dolaylı olarak Kaya hocamız gelemedi, katılamadı. Ama emin ellerdesiniz. Ivo Hoca, Alper Hoca, Pierre hepiniz hoş geldiniz burada demek istiyorum bir kere daha. Ve topu doğrudan size atıyorum. Güzel bir kitap oldu. Ben de dolaylı olarak şahidi oldum bu sürecin. Sağ olsun İvo da arada bir bizimle hep paylaştı gidişatı. Bence akademik literatüre bayağı güzel bir katkı oldu. Ellerinize ve aklınıza sağlık diyerek çekiliyorum. Topu Alper hocama atıyorum moderatör olarak.
Tamamdır hocam.
Buyurun.
Teşekkürler. Ivo hocam, Pierre hocam, hi, welcome. And we are here today for a special broadcast to discuss your new book entitled The Politics of Culture in Contemporary Turkey. Let's start with Ivo, maybe. Ivo hocam, can you describe how did it started, how the project started, and how did you proceed during the editing and writing of this book?
Alper Hocam, thank you very much. Before I begin, I'd like to thank my colleague and friend Erkan Saka for arranging this event and making it happen. It was very short notice. We had to move it online, and Erkan was really helpful. So Erkan, cheers. Thank you so much. And also a big thank you to Alper Hoca for moderating this event. It's Alper's birthday today, so on his birthday to be doing something like this. Once again, thank you so much, and happy birthday. So basically, to start, I think it's quite useful to talk about how the background to this book project. So this project was this book was funded by it's an output of a project that was funded by Stiftung Mercator, and the name of the program through which our research project was funded was Blickwechsel, which means in German eye to eye, and the project this program involves putting together German and Turkish scholars and making them work on a project. And the initial idea behind our Blickwechsel research was Ne Mutlu Ateistim Diyene. So Pierre and Kaya, I think in 2018, they got funding to start a project to look into atheism and unbelief in contemporary Turkey. And this book, Politics of Culture in Contemporary Turkey, can be seen as our first output from this project. It was also at the same time, 2018, that I joined in a little later after Pierre and Kaya invited me. So yes, this book is an output of a project that was funded by Stiftung Mercator. By the way, I think it's also, if they're in the audience and if they're listening, I would like to also thank Ertuğ Tombuş from Stiftung Mercator and Tuğba Yalçınkaya for their help both during the funding process and also afterwards in terms of giving us support and feedback for our research. As for the book work on the book began in 2018 with a workshop that was organized in Marburg. And the CFP that we had announced, the call for papers that we announced to the book, received around 100 submissions. And from this 100 submissions, we sat down, me, Pierre, and Kaya, and we selected around 18, if I remember correctly. From this 18, a few people dropped out, a few people didn't attend the workshop. But then after we had a workshop where we discussed the book project and the contributions, then eventually from there, 14 of them made it to our book as chapters. So this was the general process, and as you can see, I'm talking about 2018, so it's been almost 4 years. The pandemic was also a big challenge for us because we had, finished the manuscript, but because of the global slowdown in communications and pretty much everything, the actual publication of the book took a little longer than expected. We were originally hoping for the book to be published about a year ago, but as they say, better late than never. This is the general background story of our book. And maybe just to open up the themes of the book, maybe I can just say that very broadly, this book looks at the relationship between politics, popular culture, and power. And maybe, Pierre, you'd like to elaborate a little bit and also talk about the key concept in our book, which is cultural hegemony.
Sure, at least I will try to do so. But first of all, also, thank you very much, Alper, Erkan, for inviting us here, for being with us here today. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll soon be able to meet each other face to face. It's a bit weird for me to be in Istanbul and not directly seeing you, but doing another online event. But yeah, I'm happy to be here. All right, guys. So as Ivo already said, the book addresses the relationship between culture, politics, and power. And in order to investigate this relationship, we rely in the book very much on the British tradition of cultural studies. So that is, we took inspiration from classic works like Raymond Williams' Culture and Society, from Stuart Hall and Tony Jefferson's Resistance Through Rituals, or, for instance, Dick Hebdich's Subculture, The Meaning of Style. So these classics that have already been published decades ago, but I think they're still highly relevant in order to analyze what is happening today. So against the backdrop of these classic works, the cultural is always political and cannot be separated from questions of power. And this particular understanding of culture has been heavily influenced by the thought of the Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci. I think also a person most of you, or maybe even all of you, are familiar with. And this term hegemony has been used a lot also in political sciences, in sociology, but in slightly different ways. And so therefore I will now talk about this concept of cultural hegemony that we've been relying on in this book. So all right, so what Antonio Gramsci in the 1930s was reflecting about a lot was like, yeah, why are Italian fascists under Mussolini so successful? So how are they able to manipulate the Italian public into consenting to fascist rule? So this was his major concern, and he came to the conclusion that political power is mainly based on a balance between consensus and coercion. But the most important aspect is consensus. So the ruling bloc, the ruling elite, needs to be capable to establish a consensus in order to stabilize its rule. So now when we talk about consensus, I think this also needs this needs to be explained. So when we talk about consensus here, this is not consensus on the basis of societal compromise that has been negotiated among different societal groups, but it's a consensus that relates to a process of normalization of a particular worldview as a commonly accepted norm. Yeah? So the ruling bloc's very particular worldview is being established as the commonly accepted norm in society. That's the basic idea, for this concept of cultural hegemony and how to establish this consensus. So in order to establish this consensus, in order to stay in power, the ruling bloc needs to also be able to establish discursive supremacy, and it needs to be able to control public discourse. So how do you control public discourse? How do you receive discursive supremacy in society? You can do this through different means, through controlling the media, through controlling the educational system, but you can also do it through popular culture. So what does it mean? And let me just come up with one or two examples that we also discuss in the book in order to clarify this a bit. So, for instance, in the field of popular culture, especially when we talk about Turkish television series, for instance, or also if we talk about Turkish agitprop videos that have been frequently produced by the İletişim Bakanlığı, then you can see that the ruling bloc is able or is trying to reinvent Turkish history, is trying to reinvent Turkish national identity, and to establish these particular ideas of how Turkish identity should be, how Turkish identity history should be as the accepted norm. Common example is Diriliş Ertuğrul, a television series everybody knows here, and everybody knows here much better than I do, I guess. So the fact is that from a historical perspective, we know nothing more about Ertuğrul than an inscription on an old coin. So that's all. So we're not even sure if the person existed in history. But if you ask common people in the streets or youngsters what they think about Ertuğrul and what he did, so they can tell you whole stories. And what I try to say here is that the ruling bloc, at least to a certain degree, has been able to establish a particular perspective on Turkish history through these television series, and it's becoming like a kind of accepted truth. Then, of course, the aspect of consensus and discursive supremacy is also very much about the politics of remembering and disremembering. So it's not only what's been said and written in the educational system, in popular culture, or in newspapers, but it's also about what's not being said, what's no longer visible. We had this discussion a few days ago, 2 days ago, when we had the first book launch, and one of the teachers who was present, he complained that particular aspects have completely or almost completely vanished from Turkish school textbooks. So discussion about Tanzimat reforms, discussion about theater plays. So this has vanished. So it's also very much about what is being excluded from public discourse. Yeah, all right. Maybe one point to add here, and then maybe we can already go into discussion or talk about the different chapters, is that what the book is also trying to do is to contribute to a better understanding of authoritarian populism and the decline of democracy. And this not only in Turkey, but also on a broader context. So many of you might be familiar with this concept of authoritarian populism. It also goes back to Stuart Hall's writings in the late 1970s and early 1980s on Thatcherism. And what Hall was concerned about back then was that Thatcherism, which started out as a conservative movement, might turn into a particular form of new fascism, and a form of fascism that keeps certain democratic structures intact, but still, establishes a form of authoritarian. And here we have a differentiation between what, for instance, the
I think Pierre has an unstable connection. Yes, Ivo, can you turn your microphone on? It's muted right now.
Sorry, Alper. I think Pierre is just reconnecting. There was a problem with the connection. Let's see, and if not, I can just continue on. Doesn't matter for me. Maybe one thing for me to talk about while we are waiting on Pierre to reconnect would be also the concept of culture that we use in this book. And I think that's very important, because when we were writing this book, we had two kind of arguments in mind that we wanted to open up. The first one was this very popular discourse that we see, especially in opposition circles, but also in the government circles, about how the AKP has not been able to quote unquote conquer culture. So the opposition discourse goes that look, they managed to take everything. They've taken the institutions, they've conquered the economy, they now have the capital, but one thing that they couldn't do is create their own elites. So this is something that we hear very popularly, and they say, look, no matter what they do, they will not have an Orhan Pamuk, they will not have a Yaşar Kemal, and so forth, And our argument, and in this book, what we want to emphasize is that the situation is a little bit more complicated than this, because here what we're doing is what these kind of discourses are doing is that they're conflating the different kind of understandings of culture. If you look at this culture debate from a perspective of elite or high culture, yes, you might say that this argument is valid. But if you look at it from the realm of popular culture, you see a very different kind of perspective. And actually, we would argue that in certain areas or within certain contexts, the AKP has been very successful in mobilizing popular culture and using popular culture to create their own hegemonic project, And that maybe perhaps if we are going to, and this also kind of ties into, okay, if they don't, if they're not able to, control the culture, if they don't have their cultural elite, then how come they're so popular? So this also ties into another. And our argument is actually popular culture, that the AKP has been, quite successful at instrumentalizing popular culture and creating consensus through various aspects of it, And then maybe the counter argument to this would be, but how about Erdogan? So Erdogan quite often, he goes and, he said it numerous times in numerous occasions that, we've done everything, but we've not been able to conquer culture. So these are not the words of, Erdogan, but these are the words of what Erdogan said. So here I think that there are two different things that he's indicating. One of them is that maybe what he's confessing or suggesting is that the methods that the AKP has used to take over government institutions or various industries in the Turkish economy are not really applicable to culture. That culture is a much more slippery realm. It's a much more dynamic realm, wherein when these methods are used, they often also tend to fire back. So maybe what he's admitting is over here that these are not the methods. These methods are not working in this kind of a context, But what maybe opposition discourses, opposition critics are thinking or imagining is something quite different. So maybe this is something that I would like to also point out while Pierre just joined us. So hi, Pierre.
I'm terribly sorry, but the internet connection here in the hotel is a bit tricky. It's on and off. So really, I'm sorry for dropping out here.
Don't worry, we understand.
I can't remember what I talked about before. I think I tried to make a point about authoritarian populism and the decline of democracy. And I think this is a concept that has become important again in recent years. At least there are a number of authors who have picked up on that concept. For instance, Jeremy Morlock or Harrison Inglehart. So they are talking about authoritarian populism again, and they are also related to Gramsci's concepts and the ability of these new authoritarian regimes to establish consensus in society. And so I think that's something we are seeing here in Turkey, but we are also seeing that in other countries, like in Poland, like in Hungary. We also saw that with Donald Trump in the US. And so I think this book is it's of course about Turkey, but at least I hope that other researchers who are focusing on popular culture and cultural studies in other regions, might also take something from the book.
Maybe, Pierre, it might be also useful to touch upon the idea of authoritarian populism and culture wars, because, authoritarian populism also always plays upon creating majorities, and culture wars becomes a vehicle for this.
Right. I mean, maybe it also makes sense to from this perspective, to talk a bit more about culture, and to what we understand, what our understanding of culture is. So I think what already became clear from our talk is that we do not consider culture as high culture. We are not talking about art. Also, the way we see culture is not art or not only art, but it's also about culture practices in everyday life. So it's about the ordinary. And this, of course, again, against this cultural studies background influenced by British cultural studies. So what does that mean? It means that that particular culture practices within this context of authoritarian populism suddenly become political. Yeah, I mean, one of the examples that Ivo discusses in the volume is about alcohol consumption in everyday life. So what is considered to be the norm? What is considered, how should the ideal Turkish citizen behave? And that is, of course, portrayed in the media. It's portrayed in the educational system. So, you know, if you drink a beer in public, this might be considered a political act, even though it is not intended as such. Or if you, for instance, do not fast during Ramadan, this might be considered an act of disrespect, and might be also seen as a political act that not only goes against the religious norms, but also against the ruling bloc that has been promoting these particular ways of behavior and lifestyle over the past 10 to 20 years. And I think what these cultural practices stand for is also what they make visible. Is this breakdown of consensus.
Yes.
And the breakdown of the internet also, I think, now.
Freeze. Okay, let's, by the way, there are some questions, but I will keep them, for the ending of the conversation, our discussion. And also Sosyal Kafa from the chats gave some answers for the questions. But things, how do you, in fact, define in the means of that all the collected articles and the meaning through your book, how do you define New Turkey?
So this is a very good question, and the way we've tried to organize this book is that it's like organized like a puzzle. So it's bits and pieces of what is going on right now in Turkey, and when you put them all together, they give you a wider picture of what's happening, just like a puzzle. When the small pieces don't necessarily mean anything in themselves, but when you put them together, they give you an idea about the greater whole. And here, I think New Turkey, this is a term that was used very frequently for a long time. Now it's not so popular anymore, which is also interesting. I wonder what's happening and why it's fallen out of use. But New Turkey touches on or denotes, and I think this is very much related to the idea of creating consensus or creating consent and cultural hegemony, that it is indicative of a new, of a hegemonic project, of the attempt to create a new citizen in Turkey, to create new social norms, to create new values, which we see as normative. And this book is all very much about trying to see and delineate what has become politicized and what has become makbul or ordinary in Turkish society. And of course, here within the Gramscian perspective, this is a very dynamic process. So what is New Turkey, what is the hegemonic project of New Turkey is very much also defined by the dominant ideologies. And within the Gramscian perspective, this is always the status quo is a product of those who are in power. So just as the alliances which make up power or the status quo in society change, then our meanings of what is considered ordinary, what is acceptable, what is not also change, And I think also this is also very important to understand what New Turkey is, especially to put it more specifically, we are also talking about the notion of pious conservatism. This is something that is very important, maybe to understand nationalism, Turkish nationalism, ethnocentric nationalism. Also, and very important, I think, another important and not so talked about aspect is Sunni supremacy or Sunni suprematism, if there's a word like that. This is something that Kaya Hoca also wrote about very extensively in his chapter. So the idea of turning Turkey into a more Sunni society, so to speak. And I think this is something that we are witnessing, and we have witnessed over the past 20 years that increasingly Turkey has become less of a Muslim, more of a quote-unquote Sunni society. And for instance, when we see Erdogan, going abroad and, engaging in international relations, he's maybe the first leader, Turkish leader, that is doing it on the basis of being a Sunni, identifying himself first in the international arena as a Sunni rather than a Turk, whereas the Turkish person is a Turk leader, So this is definitely one aspect of it. Secondly, pious conservatism. So the idea of conservative values being definitive or being, the status quo, being normative for the ordering of public life, of the public space. This is very much, for instance, when we are talking about alcohol, this is a very good example of it, that, within the, pious conservative kind of, worldview, that alcohol is something that can be tolerated but must be invisible from the public eye. So we're seeing the reordering of public space alongside this dominant ideology. When we're talking about institutions, we are seeing the increasing, introduction of religious schooling, of religious values. And an example I can give is, for instance, how ordinary high schools are being converted into Imam Hatip high schools, that suddenly what is considered as the standard, the normal quote unquote high school becomes Imam Hatip. This is already something, in itself is something that, can say is very, very indicative of a normative transformation. And also the creation of, ethnic others or religious others and their scapegoating. And as I say, this tends to change from time to time. So, Kurds, Alevis, minorities, LGBT. Just this week, it was the 8th of March, it was Women's Day. I think this is, just looking at the historical kind of, how should I say, looking at, how Women's Day was celebrated during the first few years of the AKP rule, and now the point where it's come today, wherein, people are even unable to protest. This is very good. It's a very good example of how this has been, politicized and transformed. So maybe these are the things that come to my mind immediately. Maybe when Pierre comes back online, maybe we can add a little bit extra.
From the audience right now, Aylin Seçkin is asking 2 questions. The first one, I'm reading: many thanks. Is there any chapter relating to taste capital formation? This is a topic on which I've been working on for about 16 years now. And the second one, Aylin is also asking any chapters related to cultural capital, stock definition of Turkey, incorporating cultural heritage, and etc.
Cultural heritage, let me see, maybe her cultural heritage might be something that we touch upon. I'm just looking through myself.
I think we do, at least indirectly, in Petek Onur's chapter about the urban restructuring of Ankara. And she discusses how this Yeni Osmanlıcılık, this neo-Ottomanism, is being reinvented and reinstated in the middle of Ankara. You're reconstructing a historical part of the city that in the end has never looked like that. And she also demonstrates how this cultural heritage is being reinvented and being influenced by popular culture, by television series, by other things that are present. So I think in this chapter we are dealing, at least indirectly, with the cultural heritage. And of course also in Errol Salam's chapter. Yeah, I mean, Errol, he speaks about the Romeka speaking community in the Black Sea region. And I mean, how can Romeka be part of cultural heritage in Turkey? So he really discusses that. And also the many ambiguities within that community. On the one hand, considering themselves as Turks from a culture perspective, but on the other hand, it's also very clear that there's also another form of cultural heritage influencing their society. So these were the 2 examples that came to my mind at first. Ivo, anything else you?
I mean, the contradiction of, being a Turkish nationalist in public space. So when being asked, who are you, where are you from? I'm from, Central Asia. I am, a Turkic tribe, descendant of the Turkic tribes, and then at home speaking Romeka, which is an ancient, antiquated dialect of Greek. So how does this contradiction function? And with Petek's as, cultural heritage and also a very sanitized version of cultural heritage, So, a history or cultural conservation without all the undesirable, minorities, without all the, messy, fuzzy things in between. So, an Ottoman past that is projected, that is devoid of all the problematics, so to speak.
Yeah. I think there's one aspect we might have made clear, but Ivo, maybe you already talked about it while I was gone. So when we talk about cultural hegemony here in the book, so we provide 16 case studies, and some of these case studies show how cultural hegemony is being established, but there are also other case studies that demonstrate how this cultural hegemony is being challenged, being contested in everyday life especially, and how alternative narratives to the dominant narratives are being developed and somehow brought into the public sphere. And related to this, then of course it's also about this breakdown of consensus that can be seen in different chapters. Yeah, just to make that clear, we're not only talking about how hegemony is being established, but it's also about resistance towards this hegemony.
Pierre, Alper also asked about New Turkey. So some of the answers I gave are like Paris conservatism, also the Sunnification of Turkish society, and nationalism. Yeah. Maybe is there anything else you'd like to add that I missed?
Is it something like Louis Bonaparte's Brumaire, New Turkey, or something different?
Actually, it's more like an empty signifier. It's like a projection, and in the end, it's a very vague term. It's being used in political rallies to give people a vision, but what Yeni Turkey really looks like, it's kept unclear. Yeah, but of course, it's somehow influenced by what Ivo said, by conservatism, by religion, by this Yeni Osmanlıcı look. This is influencing the concept, but it's not clearly defined.
These are the pillars. These are the pillars upon which New Turkey, the discursive pillars through which New Turkey is constructed.
And I think you can better understand New Turkey by investigating what's no longer there. What's missing from the public sphere. What was here 10 years ago? What was here 20 years ago in the educational system, in the public sphere, in cultural practices, in everyday speech? What kind of wording, what kind of phrases are people using more and more? And do you need to use, for instance, religious phrases in order to get a job? Meanwhile, that's at least what a close friend of mine has claimed.
And about the methodology of editing process, did you first come up with the chapters names or the chapter subjects and then made an open call, or you just made a call and through them you decided to create the chapters, or you decided to construct chapters?
Okay, so we try to establish coherence from the very beginning, and I think that somehow makes the book also unique. We came up with the concepts about cultural hegemony, so we came up with these concepts and then had an open call, and then we saw how would people in their talks connect to these concepts. And as Ivo said, we had 80, 100 contributions at first, and then we invited people for a workshop. So they came up with their own subject. What was important for us is that it is recent research during the AKP era, and that everybody has an empirical basis for their research. So this was crucial for us. So then we had the workshop, and then we rephrased our concepts. Then we wrote something of a preliminary introduction, and then again asked all of the authors who were still on board, please, can you try to relate to these key concepts in your writings, in your texts? And with that, we created a first manuscript. So we didn't want to produce a kind of eclectic volume, but and I just shared the link to the introductory chapter, which is open access. So if any one of you has time to read it, so it's also not kind of like the classical introduction that you write a bit about your concept and then you summarize every single chapter. It's more like a text that integrates the different chapters as part of the argument. And that's the way how we try to do it. And that's also why it took so much time. You know, it was a lot of back and forth, but we're also very happy that all the authors in the book, that they agreed on it, you know, and that they invested so much time in these discussions as well. Does it answer your question, Alper?
Yes, thank you. Because as long as I remember, Kandiotis and Sakmander's book, like 20 years before, it was before Yeni Türkiye, and it was looking at how the old Turkey was looking from the cultural perspective. So in this sense, your work is quite important for me to make a kind of comparative understanding, to create a comparative understanding of Turkey, new and old Turkey. And also, Aylin Seçkin also asked another question. So you argue that AKP used culture as a method to intensify its power by Yeditepe Bienal as an alternative to contemporary Istanbul?
I can answer that. Actually, yeah, I can. We can. I think that is a correct statement, but I would add also that AKP tries to use culture as a method to intensify its power, because we are talking about cultural hegemony, and cultural hegemony is a very slippery dynamic. So it's not, at some points, these alternatives work. In some, they fail very bitterly, like, for example, the Yeditepe Bienal, like choose your art, or whatever the slogan was. Mm-hmm. Or another example would be Bilal Erdoğan's Ethnospor festivities. Yeah, these were not very successful. Or in our book also, for instance, Burak Onaran, he has a book chapter about Kutula Mave, which is kind of, was at least tried for a while to be put forward as an alternative to the Çanakkale Destanı. So suddenly that we have this, valorization of a battle that was, the last battle wherein the Arabs and the Turkish Ottomans fought side by side against the British. This is valorized as an example of, destan or bravery, while, Çanakkale is suddenly, pushed onto the back seat. So this is another example that didn't work so well. But an example that worked, I think, or is relatively successful is Abdülhamit, or the rehabilitation of Abdülhamit as a ruler. So, in my childhood, reading history books, in high school, I remember that, Abdülhamit was presented as a istibdatçı, as a censoring autocrat that, was basically a very evil, bad sultan, to put it very broadly, And then what we see in the past 20 years is that he has been kind of, he's been brought in from the wilderness, so to speak, and suddenly he's presented as this, patriot, sultan that balances, Western and Eastern powers, and that is the lion, so to speak, of Islam, and so forth,
Yeah.
And we see that, and it's very much also in line with Necip Fazıl's kind of, worldview and ideology, which, Necip Fazıl being perhaps the main ideologue of, political Islam and of AKP's interpretation of political Islam in Turkey. He has this very famous book, Ulu Hakan Abdülhamit, is one of his biggest tombs, so we see in certain areas that they have been successful, in some of them they have failed quite utterly, So yes, but not always would be my answer to Aylin.
Yeah. So the example we have about this in the book is Caner Tekin's chapter on representations of Abdülhamit II, first in Turkish school textbooks, and then he compares this image, how this has changed with the Payitaht television series.
Yeah. And also there are other questions about where to get the book. This is a real question, I think.
Erkan was joking, yeah.
Yeah, maybe Erkan can share a link.
Don't mention that.
No, okay. Where can you get the book? I mean, at the moment, we only have the English version, and the English version is incredibly expensive, so no one can afford it. It's like a library version. However, we were lucky that we were selected by Knowledge Unlatched. It's a new project that tries to publish books in the humanities and social sciences open access. So in autumn, we do not have the exact date, but in autumn the book will be available open access, and you can find it through JSTOR and also through several hundred university libraries. Then, or you go directly to Knowledge Unlatched. I can also type the name here so that you know it's for everyone. I mean, who wants free books on social sciences and humanities. That's one of the sites. Yeah.
Also,
okay. So
higher education institution, you can also order the book to your library. There is a button on the Edinburgh University Press webpage which says "Recommend to your librarian." You can just click that, and it sends the book directly to the library. So that's the other option. If you're
not for free, unfortunately.
No, not for free, but the university pays for it. Which is
Sure, that would be cool. I'm just trying to share that link with you.
Pierre, I shared the link with Edinburgh link with the YouTube chat. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So the first chapter is already available open access. You can download it, and then can I also edit this link to Knowledge Unlatched in the private chat?
I'm sharing it now. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, thank you. And hopefully we'll also have a Turkish version sometime soon. We are also dealing with that.
We're looking for actually a Turkish publisher. So if there's anybody that's listening to us, we're here. Help us. Get in contact with us. Yeah.
Open call for publishers. Do you have anything to add or to summarize? I don't know, Erkan, if you have any questions, maybe you can contribute also.
No, thank you. Not at this moment. It was quite clear for me. And Aylin Hoca, thanks to Aylin Hoca. Yeah.
Yes.
Some other questions were asked.
Yeah, maybe it might be useful to give to the audience an overview about our book chapters and about the sections in the book.
Okay, we can quickly do that. Okay, so the book is divided in 5 sections. The first section is about subcultures and the politics of lifestyles, and within this section we have one book chapter by Ivo about alcohol consumption in Turkey. We'll have a second chapter in this section written by Douglas Madsen. He's a scholar from Sweden on Islamic semiotics in Turkish black metal and how this is used as a form of resistance towards the dominant culture of pious conservatism. The third chapter here is written by me on religious fatigue, tired of religion, on atheism and non-religion in Turkey. Then comes the second cluster, the second section in the book, which is on satire and agitprop videos in New Turkey. Here again, it's 3 chapters, one by Josh Carney on election propaganda, and necropolitics in New Turkey, also a very interesting concept. We have another chapter by Can Evren on agitprop videos, and he's using, what's the example he's using? Of a football match, and he's using this. He discusses how this football metaphor is being used in Turkish politics. And the third chapter, written by Valentina Marcella, is about counter-hegemonic discourses in Turkish satirical magazines. Then comes the third section on civil society and the politics of gender. We have two chapters dealing with gender issues. The first one is written by Gülşen Çakıl Dinçer. Gülşen, she has been intensively working with Kadem, a women's rights organization you will know, which is which can be affiliated with the pious conservative spectrum. But what is really interesting in this chapter, what was really interesting for me, is that I really got an inside view, and it also, showed to me or demonstrated that there's also a breakdown of consensus within the pious conservative movement. So Kadem's positions are very much different from, for instance, AKP Kadın Kolları's position. The next chapter in this section is written by Ayşe Çavdar, and Ayşe Çavdar, she talks about the politics of unveiling in New Turkey, and she uses this hashtag 10 years challenge as a starting point, where mostly women, took a picture or posted pictures 10 years ago and today, and apparently some women also posted pictures of themselves 10 years ago wearing a headscarf and today not wearing a headscarf. And she investigates this discussion that emerges from this 10 years challenge. Hashtag. All right, and then a third chapter in this section was written by Julia Lazarus. She's a filmmaker actually, and she made a documentary movement on what's the name of the organization? Kuzey Ormanları Savunma Derneği,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, Northern Forest Defense Association. Okay, so now the fourth section of the book, which contains 4 chapters, is entitled Meeting Neo-Ottomanism in Popular Culture. So this is very much about the television series we already mentioned. We have this chapter by Burak Onaran on the television series of Kutlulamare. We have a chapter by Caner Tekin on how Abdülhamid II has been depicted or represented in Turkish textbooks, and he compares that with the television series Payitaht. The third chapter, written by Dilara Brileva, is about the glorious history in mainstream cinema versus the complicated history in art house films. She's contrasting this very clean history in mainstream cinema with this more complicated history that also depicts, that also represents minorities in Turkish society. And the fourth chapter in this section, we already mentioned it, was written by Petek Onur, The Politics of Nostalgia. So she relies on the works of Svetlana Boym to explain this and demonstrates how this concept of nostalgia is now being represented in the restructuring of 2 quarters in Ankara, Hamam and Hamamönü, I think. And all right, and the fifth, the last section, is entitled New Turkey's Ethno-Religious Others, and we have 3 case studies, one dealing with Sunni supremacism, written by Kaya Akyıldız, who unfortunately is not here today. We have another chapter written by Errol Salam on Romeka heritage and the masculine reconfiguration of public culture in contemporary Turkey. And the final chapter has been written by Danielle Schoen on the politics of presence relating to Romanlar culture in Istanbul, and how the ruling bloc has been trying to integrate Romanlar culture in this context of pious conservatism. And this, of course, comes with some problems. For instance, Erdogan being kissed by a singer, and
Pierre, if you remember, our first idea for the book cover was Kibariye and Erdogan's picture together.
All right. And I mean, we also have to mention that we really have to thank Sümeyye Keskin. Sümeyye agreed to create this book cover, this artwork. And I mean, it was great. What Sümeyye tried to do was to integrate, to invent one symbol for each chapter and then integrate it into the book cover. And I think she did a very good job, and I also adore her work as a comic artist. So I'm really, really happy that she agreed to do it. So thanks, even though I think she's not listening at the moment.
To the point where I have saved several posters that were printed by our, tanıtım birimi to put up at home and in my office, because the cover looks so pretty, you don't want to throw it away.
Okay, if you have time, there are a couple of questions from the audience. The first one
Sure, of course.
is from İlker Kafalı. He asked about relating to the 10th chapter. Can you please tell about your view on environmental activism and its potential impact on the democratization process of Turkey? Is there, anything you can say? And also the second one from Aylin Hoca, Aylin Seçkin. Do you use social media data for your paper related to religious behavior using Python, for example?
Let me answer that one very quickly. My answer, I think our answer would be no. I have social media data that I've collected about the deism debate in Turkey, but it is not included in this book. It is for our second upcoming publication, which will be about atheism and non-belief in Turkey. And I have one chapter that I've pretty much already written, which talks about, which is based around Ali Erbaş's infamous rant that he had a few years back when he talked about this as, din dışı, whatever, all of this kind of stuff. So I have a study about it, yes, and if needed, I'll be happy to share the data. I mean, that's not a problem. But it wasn't, in the scope of this book project, so it's not included here. So yes, and
just to add that we organized a second workshop 2.5 years ago here in Istanbul with the title Atheism, Deism and Non-Religion in Contemporary Turkey. And we also invited like a dozen scholars here from Turkey to talk about the subject. But because of this pandemic and everything, at least in my life, everything kind of froze. And therefore there's a huge delay with this book. But hopefully it will also come out relatively soon.
Inshallah, as they say.
Yeah. And then this question about chapter 10 by Julia, in how far this will contribute to the democratization process in Turkey. I mean, I didn't write a chapter. I mean, it's like with every social society movement. I mean, you need these kind of movements. If there's no longer a civil society movement, if the civil society movement is suppressed, then you cannot have democracy. But that not really answers your question. I'm not sure if I'm competent enough to answer it here because I didn't do the research on that chapter.
Oh, sure.
Ivo, do you have anything to say about that?
I would pretty much say the same thing. I mean, what Julia's chapter was remarkable, I think, is how she used the camera as a visual method to document activist practices, and that was for us the counter-hegemonic, or the, so to speak, the spice of her study, because all of the other studies are textual, so they're just like, research interviews, whatever, but Julia actually shot a documentary and then used the stills from her documentary as a method of inquiring and documenting these practices. And as such, I think what she wanted to kind of prepare was an archive of these practices, and using visuality and film is an interesting way to go around it, rather than having these kind of quite wooden and textbooky kind of, studies about activist practices.
Mm-hmm. And it's also about creating these alternative narratives, because I mean, where can you see any representations of this form of resistance in the Turkish media? It's more or less absent. It's invisible. Mm-hmm. And creating a documentary, talking about it, that's one way of making it visible again. And therefore, I think it's really important for a democratization process.
Maybe one thing to tie this into is that a key theme in our book is the politics of visibility. Yeah. I mean, this is something that comes out in every corner, in every kind of shadow. You see this theme lurking, from like Erol Sağlam's Romeka speakers, who speak Greek at home but are Turkish nationalists on the outside, to alcohol, to Julia's, as you say, there's like these activists are working to prevent the Istanbul Havalimanı project. Nobody ever covered them, and so this is a way of shedding light. So I think that this is also something, and politics of visibility is very much also related to the idea of governmentality, the status quo, and so forth.
the politics of visibility and the politics of invisibility, of course. I'm just thinking about my case study about atheism and non-religion in Turkey. And I mean, you might have people who are consider themselves non-religious or atheists, but you wouldn't realize in their everyday life, because still they might go for Friday prayer or for prayer together with their colleagues, because it's being socially expected for them to participate in. So they remain invisible in everyday life. So politics of visibility and politics of invisibility. What cannot be seen, what can no longer be seen.
Thank you very much, dear Pierre and Ivo. If you want, I don't have any more questions. I think we covered most of the aspects of your study. But if you want to add anything.
Just,
I mean, if you
like,
yeah.
Please go on.
No, Pierre, go ahead. I interrupted. Go ahead.
The only thing I want to add is, like, anyone who wants to join into a deeper discussion with us, please feel free to get in touch with us. It would be also very valuable for us to know what you think about the book, also what you think about potential shortcomings of the book. What should be considered if we further work on that topic. So any feedback is welcome.
Maybe one thing that I'd like to talk about a little bit is also the things that we left out. So, we're talking about visibility, and visibility, it also applies to us, because ultimately, when we were selecting this book, we did go through a procedure, and we had priorities about certain subjects. For example, religion was something we were interested in. Alcohol, these were things that we had prioritized, and some things got left out. So maybe my question to my co-editor, and I can answer it myself, would be, what are the things that got left out? So how did we play into this? So how did we engage in politics of visibility, invisibility? And what, if we had to do an upcoming volume, what would we add?
Are you asking that question to me, Ivo?
I am asking it as if somebody asked. I'm pretending to be the audience. I'll answer it myself also. Yeah.
I mean, that's a question of how did we select the case studies, and I tried to explain that before. I mean, we're not just freaks like, okay, we want to have something on this and that, and on this topic, on that topic, and then just find someone who would write on it. So we really had to rely also on what was there and who was ready to write something, who had empirical material. So this very much influenced this publication process and what is visible in the book and what is not. I mean, of course, you could use many other subcultures, for instance, in order to demonstrate how these subcultures are contesting the dominant culture of pious conservatism in Turkish society. Ivo, you spoke about hip-hop culture, for instance. That would be a great example. We do not have a chapter on LGBTQI plus subculture. So these particular case studies are, of course, missing, but it's not that we deliberately excluded them. I mean, what
nightlife is definitely, one thing that we skipped out upon, I mean, even the title of the chapter is even already there. The party is over in Beyoğlu,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you can. We
also don't have a chapter on Alevi religious culture, for instance, and this whole discussion on Alevi açılımı, this opening process. We haven't discussed it either. But with regard to that, we were like, okay, there are so many studies already on that particular process, so we do not necessarily have to include it. We also touch upon the Gezi Park protests and their consequences, their impact, but we only touch upon it. And we also decide, like, let's not only focus on the Gezi Park protests and the cultural production that was taking place there, because there are already quite a number of books that are discussing that. So we didn't want to write another book on Gezi Park, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Not just another Gezi Park book. Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Animal
we
rights.
We can do that next year, actually. We should do that next year, in 2023.
10th anniversary, yes. This key year of 2023, has so much symbolic value.
Yeah.
for many reasons. Animal rights is definitely something again that we missed upon, and I think the perspective that's to keep or retain when talking about these subjects is the idea of hegemony. How is hegemony established, and how is counter hegemony circulated through these mediums, these spaces? Because that's also the interesting, that's our perspective for this book, or this kind of paradigm within which we operate. I mean, music is this very good example, because at one point, we see in the past, we not just in a few years, but we've seen the AKP years, a big instrumentalization of music in terms of prop videos, just all these marches, all these, songs that are being played, during the elections. We see that, music is instrumentalized, by the AKP very, very extensively. And then suddenly at the same time, you see, Tarkan releasing a song, Geçecek, and it causing a huge fuss, in the government circles about, the implications. Did he write this about COVID? Did he write it about our, president? What's happening? So you see, and, like Tarkan not being the most, politicized, activist kind of, singer out there, So this is what I mean. So there's this interplay. Again, maybe, animal rights, something that, I've spoken with my friends about, colleagues. And at one point, is it the most, some more critical ones would say that it's the most depoliticized form of political activism, in a society that's so polarized that there's no way, or all the bridges through which the two blocks in society the bridges are burnt between all the between the two blocks in society. Is animal rights just the only way through which you can create something that's more collective, something wherein you can create a counter-hegemonic majoritarianism? So again, something to talk about. Many ideas. Hip hop, again, at one point you have, Ezel, and once again, being a very, opposition, artist, like the definition almost, I would say, using hip hop as a way to criticize the government. You had the Susamam a few years ago, which had like millions and millions of hits, although some of the participating artists then later retracted their participation, whatever, it had a huge effect. And then at the same time, you have, AKP-funded bike gangs like Osmanlı Germania using hip-hop as a way of, making themselves visible in both German and Turkish society, And these guys are basically militias, they're a biker gang.
I mean, actually, what you're mentioning, Ivo, would make an excellent case study. I mean, compare what's going on in Turkish hip-hop with hip-hop in Russia. I just watched an excellent Arte documentary on hip-hop in Russia, and how some hip-hoppers still try to criticize and contest Putin, while others directly, are being used or support the leader. And then we're back, at this level, how far does our book contribute to this discussion on authoritarian populism and the decline of democracy? I mean, that's certainly something I would really like to dig deeper into, to have case studies from other regions, from other countries, and make a comparison. And that's what I'm looking for personally.
And there's there's a practical question. Pierre Seçkin also asking your email. If you want to share your email, you can write from private chat, and we can share from the comment, or if you like.
Do that.
Also, there are some propositions about the possible subjects or chapters by Aylin Seçkin. Cultural capital is missing. She says also high culture part is missing. The live performing arts markets, the closing for arts, performing arts, and Syrian and changing culture. Of course, there we can add lots of other sub chapters. It's like a never-ending situation, since the culture is always changing and developing in a sense. Also, Zehra Salem asks, any more content as is live in the future? workshops or seminars, webinars format for an audience who would like to listen?
Oh.
Are you planning to make workshops or discussion sessions for the future about culture, politics in Turkey, or some other subject?
People are inviting, sure, why not?
I mean, sure. I mean, we can think about it. We can organize something together with you who are listening at the moment. I would love to do that. We'll also discuss the matter at an international conference, but that's a bit out of reach. At this year's Mesa, we are going to talk about Neo-Ottomanism in Turkish popular culture. We have a panel there, and also hopefully a roundtable discussion on the politics of culture in contemporary Turkey.
We also
but that's a bit out of reach.
Mm-hmm. We also have events planned for, I think, University of Texas Austin is going to organize something with us, and there's going to be an event in Berlin organized by Humboldt. So if we couldn't meet over here face to face, maybe if you're around, you can catch us over there, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yes, keep following the writers. So thank you very much, hocalarım.
Yeah. And thank you to
Erkan hocam, söz sizde. Master of
I'm very pleased, and also in future discussions, panels, Sosyal Kafa can always host you here, and also of course Bilgi Media Department. Hopefully, we will do more stuff later. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Erkan. And hopefully next time we will be able to meet each other face to face.
Oh yeah. This was, originally it would be an offline meeting at the campus, but there's a snowstorm. Let's pray so that Pierre can hang out. Now he's stuck in the hotel, so yeah. Okay.
The irony of Pierre coming over here to do this talk and then having to do it online. Befitting of our age, let's say, Once again, thank you, everybody who's listening. Thank you so much for your patience, and I hope we were able to tell, our book to you, and I hope you enjoyed listening.
Yeah. Thank you very much also from my side, Erkan, Alper, for doing this with us, and also thank you very much to all the listeners for joining us here.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm stopping here. See you another time.